Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back to us here at the Breaking Bread Village, where we sit down, have a conversation, and break bread. I'm really excited today to have our guest that we have on today. His name is David Dent, and he is a journalist. He has written articles for the Washington Post, Huffington Post, Essence. The list goes on and on. He is doing a lot of work out there for the community. Him and his wife both do a lot of stuff in the community. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him on so we can get started. Hey, David, how are you?
Hey, how are you? Thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome. I'm so appreciative that you are here today with us. I'm just really excited to have this conversation today. So, first of all, if you want to kind of introduce yourself and kind of tell a little bit about your backstory, I'll let you do that. And then I get so excited. I get, getting right to it. So, but I want you to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Sure. Well, I am a journalist and a professor. I teach writing and journalism at New York University. And I write for a lot of magazines, a lot of publications, the Daily Beast, Vice, written for the New York Times, and many others. And I also wrote a book, In Search of Black America, which kind of looked at the diversity of African American life. It was an on-the-road journey into the Black experience. And I guess you could say that I am, like you, very curious about people and their motivations, and think that understanding people who may think in similar ways to me or may think very different than I do, understanding them and the root of how and why they feel the way they feel is something that we all engage in, or at least it's something that journalists and writers should definitely engage in and try others to understand who may be the other from their point of view. And that's something that motivates the journalism that I do.
Awesome. Well, that actually was my first question, was what inspired you to become a journalist? Because as I shared with you earlier, I've always been very inquisitive since I was little, and used to get in trouble for it a lot of times because I asked a lot of questions, and people would always see it as me trying to challenge them or being combative. But really, honestly, my brain was just moving and just trying to understand what made them, kind of how they were and what made them think how they thought. So I've always been very curious. So I just wanted to ask you, what inspired you to become a journalist?
That's a great question. It's funny because I think back on it, and there's one thing in particular that I've always, I guess similar to you, I've always been very inquisitive and curious about people, and I've always had questions about people and things. And one interesting thing happened when I was in the fifth grade, my family moved from New York City, Queens, New York, to Raleigh, North Carolina. And that was a very dramatic move.
Yes.
And, the adapting and adjusting to that triggered an interest in writing. And just kind of just the adjusting to that was kind of a challenge. And I think that, looking back, was probably a motivating factor that I knew very little about, that I didn't know was occurring at the time. And of course, It was the time when the country was, it was in the early 70s when the country was adapting to integration and, just kind of living in a new way. So that was another thing that, I guess stimulated my curiosity a lot. And then with that, I guess it became an interest in writing as I came toward high school. So I guess, journalism seemed to be a natural fit since it combined an interest in writing and a love of writing and reading with also just a curiosity and just a real interest in people, and what motivates people, what inspires people, what makes people tick. I think that unyielding desire to understand people kind of led me into this field.
Wow, that's amazing. No, I totally get that. Wow. So during that period of integration, wow, that's a whole nother conversation, but I would love to talk more about that one time too, just kind of your perspective and kind of how that was for you as well. I really want to get into a tough topic for some people, this war on the media, right? And the fake news narratives that are being uh, I want to use the word spewed sometimes, or just thrown out there randomly at times. And I think people have always kind of questioned the media, right? Always, because I've been one. I mean, where it's like, let me kind of dissect this a little bit more before I take this 100% at face value, right? So I think that's always been a thing. But now, for the past couple of years, the war on the media has been something that you see it in so many news articles. You see it, on news report shows, and it's just always people saying that, and the fake news. And I found that there are some things with when people say fake news, and I remember just seeing it or just heard it. So I knew it happened, and then it's fake news because it's something they don't agree with or they're upset that you're bringing it up. So I just wanted to know, what's your take on this war on the media, because you are a part of that.
I think it's really a number of it's troubling, extremely troubling. I think the most troubling thing about it is that we have an administration, and I don't want to spend, there's a lot of dumping on the Trump administration, but I think some of that, much of that's well deserved, and in this regard, it very much is, because I think that there is, first of all, kind of a mindset coming out of the White House that encourages a distrust of the media and a distrust of the fourth estate, and that really doesn't respect what news reporting, the value of news reporting in a democracy. And so there is an idea that you discount everything that does not validate your political political leaning as well as your political motivations. You deem that as fake news, and so I think that's a big part of it. That it really is, it really does grow from a culture that first and foremost comes out of the White House and is then emulated in so many other respects throughout society. And I think that, it's interesting, one thing that the manipulation of technology also leads to, the presence of fake news. That, there's one example right now that comes to mind that in Kansas City, the African-American mayor of Kansas City, he was, says because of the fact that they're having an increase in COVID, he has decided to strengthen and roll back a lot of the, to roll back the measures to protect people. Sure. And one of them, of course, is wearing a mask. And there was the reaction to some people in the community to that was horrific. But the part about it that's connected to fake news is that I noticed is that one of the critics of the mayor actually put out a fake, doctored, actually, a picture of the mayor. And you have the mayor standing next to someone who had a Black Lives Matter T-shirt, and that was so the mayor actually did participate in a protest in the town. But then they doctored the photo and put a picture of on the photo of that said, excuse my language, "fuck the police." And
wow!
I mean, that was and circulated on Twitter.
Oh, and wow!
That's an example of how technology is manipulated and how there are lots of lots of misinformation. I remember during the Trayvon Martin, and so stuff, though, I have to say predates Trump. And this is an example.
Sure.
I remember interviewing someone in Colorado about, we were talking about gun control. But in the conversation, the Trayvon Martin case came up. And so the person I interviewed started coming forth with all of these basic lies that have been spread throughout sources that are not reputable about Trayvon Martin.
Yes, okay.
That were, not true.
Right.
That were demeaning to him and were trying to justify Zimmerman's horrific behavior and the murder of Trayvon Martin. And so that to me is how, is what we have, it's, on some level, to me, I mean, there are many definitions and many levels of how fake news influences us. But from my perspective, the way it's when people manipulate information to suit their political advantage and will therefore present ideas that are, false and atrocious, but yet spread and influence the way people view the political system.
Right. Because if that's what you want to believe anyway, when you see something like that, you're going to grab hold to it and share it with hundreds of people to support your narrative, right? I mean, so that's, and it's really unfortunate because I've seen so many things that you can visibly tell that it's doctored, is photoshopped, and people still will go with the narrative because they want to believe it so bad, and it's in front of their eyes, so they go with it. So it's really a sad time right now.
No, it is sad when people don't really look for information objectively, but they just look for information to validate, perspectives, and sometimes those perspectives are fallacious.
No, I agree with you. Do you feel that because you talk to a lot of people and you've talked to some people who have, changed their mindset from 2016 to now. Do you feel that people are afraid to admit that they made a mistake? Is that part of it? Because I really sit back and because some things are baffling to me because it's so in your face that is you can't deny it. And I still feel like people will support something, even though it was something that not even, a couple months ago, they said they would never support. That's the worst thing ever. It happens. But to go with their narrative and to go with, to be able to save face, I feel they still support it. So, do you feel like people are afraid to admit that?
A great question. It's funny because I remember on the Jersey Shore, I interviewed a young white law student at Rutgers, and who was from Scranton, I think. He was from Pennsylvania, and he told me that he said that he didn't like Trump, but he voted for him anyway. And he says because everyone thinks that I am a stupid, poor white trash, and and Trump represents. And I'm paraphrasing what he said, but Trump represents a narrative that's antithetical to that perception of me. And, he said, I have black friends, so I'm not racist, but everybody thinks I'm a stupid racist because of where I'm from, and everybody thinks my family is, and, all of this. And, it was an interesting conversation because I remember thinking that there was a level of stubborn kind of almost, anti-elitist, as he says, that all the elitists think that that we're stupid or what have you. So I do think that to some extent there is that element. I don't think you can stereotype all Trumpers.
Right. No, I agree.
Automatically racist or automatically, ignorant or what have you. And I think that there are, there's a diversity, but I also think that you hit on something about there are people who are stubborn about admitting they're wrong. But I do say this, that I've talked to a lot of people who have in-swing counties, the counties that voted for Obama, that Obama won in 2012 and 2008 and 2012, and that Trump then won in 2016, who are not voting for Trump, who admit that they made a mistake. Or some of them say, I didn't really make a mistake. It's just, he's just not right for the country, given, his behavior. There's one person in particular that I interviewed in Texas who said, he's just not presidential. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
We see the polls. I mean, I still say you can't totally trust the polls. As
no, you can't.
We just thought, definitely that Hillary was going to win, and we saw what happened.
Sure.
But, in talking to people and also looking at a lot of the polls and a lot of the coverage, it does seem there are people who are admitting that maybe I was wrong.
Right.
But there's some who aren't, I think, admitting, but may quietly go and vote for Biden. I just think that's a real fascinating question. I think there's a stubborn kind of feeling that you don't want to know that you were, that you are the cause of so many problems in this country.
What's happening? I think, and I agree with you. I really think that, and this is not, just to be clear, with whoever is watching, this is not an anti-Trump conversation. This is just, we're speaking about what's happening. I mean, this is really a fact. A lot of people that I've spoke to, are either embarrassed or afraid to say they even voted for him in 2016. And then some people were proud, and because they really believe that he was going to change things, and which I guess he has, kind of shaking things up. But, they thought that he was going to help, especially like lower class, middle class, and, these forgotten people. And it's been very interesting to watch. So, I'll just say it that way, to watch people who were adamantly for him, and now they aren't for him as much anymore. Some people still, of course, as you know, I mean, he can do no wrong. And but there's some that have changed their stance, but they don't want to admit it. They don't want to say, I messed up, which really, I guess for me, it's not even really a mess up. If you thought something was going to work and it doesn't work, it's okay to say it didn't work, So, exactly. Yeah.
No, exactly. Well, that's the reason I think we need to, that we need to make sure that the narrative leaves a space for people who want to leave Trumpism and who want to actually be able to step away and without having to feel like they're
being crucified.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, no, I agree. I think that's what some people are afraid of, is this, I told you so. And it's a lot of people on the other side that are doing that, that are very vocal and saying, you were wrong. And he's, and I believe that for me, I'm just saying, hey, if you change your mind, it's okay. It's okay for us to change our mind and realize that, because I'm really curious, because a lot of people who voted for Obama, both terms, and then they voted for Trump, which seemed like such a big difference. I was telling you earlier, before we came on, I'm just pulling this up real quick, that I was reading one of your articles back in May that you wrote, and you were talking about Trump's black male supporters and what they see in him. And I found that very interesting, because a lot of times, and this is just being real, when you think of Trump and Trump supporters, you have an image that comes to your head, right? And then you see these rallies, and it's all these different type of people, and then you hear, he's paying this person to be here, and this person is so you just don't know. So it was really interesting to read your article, and I just want to quote something out of here real quick, if you don't mind. And basically, it was a gentleman by the name of Desmond who voted for Obama both terms. And he said to you that he does see Trump as a racist. And he also said that, he didn't feel like he was that bright. And this is his words, not mine. And that, he talked about, which was very interesting, he talked about how racism is everywhere, and how at his job, is there, but you still go to work and you just have to respect each other. So I found that very interesting to say that he had so many stances on Trump that were not in the best light for Trump. But he said that he would still vote for him because he didn't take no stuff, is basically what he said. And he stood on, he used some other words, but
Right, I remember that. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just found that very interesting because it was a few more things, and I will share this link too for people to read this article, but it was a lot of things that did not show him in the best light. But he said that for his small business, that he felt like the Trump era was doing well for his small business, and he wants to help out his community. And if it means that he has to basically, vote for Trump, and he does respect him because he doesn't back down, that he was going to still vote for him despite feeling like he's a racist and everything. So, what did you feel about that when you interviewed him? Because that's a very interesting perspective.
It was interesting. It was shocking on some level, but very interesting. And one of the things in talking to African-American Trump supporters, and of course, one of the things that is interesting is there is a gender divide that there are, it appears to be in most polls that, 2 or 3%, 3 to 4% of African-American women support Trump, but the number rises to 15% among men. And, and one thing about conversations with those men is that they weren't really monolithic and that they had different reasons. There were some who were like, look, America's a racist country, so what do you expect? But Trump has done this and he's done that. Now, some of this was pre-COVID. Well, it was actually around COVID, but, it was like he's...
Before it got too big.
Ideas about... that even one person I talked to, who I didn't quote in the article, but, because of space constraints, but talked about how, there was Trump's stance on HBCUs, which he felt was admirable, so to speak. There were others who just thought that that he was, of course, some said he was an alpha male, that, and
I read that, yes.
They respected the fact that he was so, that he said what he felt, and that he somehow had kind of an underdog kind of persona that, in fact, in their view, was compatible with what African-American men who make it in business or whatever have to confront and have to deal with.
That's interesting.
All those perspectives were so different from mine.
Yeah.
And it was just interesting really opening up myself to listen to them.
Yes.
And to hear, and to keep probing them to find out the roots of these points of their thoughts. And, we have to understand we're not a monolithic, we're not a monolith, and that, there are different perspectives and ideas.
Sure.
That may differ very much from my own, but I thought that it was very interesting to see just what, that notion that racism is American, is apple pie, so to speak.
So you just tolerate it and move forward.
Then your decision is, your decision's independent of that, and you look at other factors that beyond that in choosing a candidate. And it's interesting that that's kind of was the perspective of many of the Black Obama Trump supporters. A lot of the white Obama Trump supporters I've talked to were drawn to are really the kinds of voters, and I don't want to be too stereotypical here,
right?
Are the type of voters who, in fact, are always looking for something new and disappointed in the end. So Obama was fresh. Obama was fresh and new and cool, and and that appealed to them. And so that's why they voted for him for to in 2008 and 2012. Though there was a drop off, of course, among white voters in 2012, and then they saw the same thing in Trump. They saw something that was different and not. There was one voter who said he voted for Obama. I thought this was really interesting. He said he voted for Obama because he felt he had, because of his limited experience in government, because he wanted someone who had not been, who was not been in government for a long period.
Maybe tainted.
Exactly. And he said that was why he loved Obama.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
No, you're okay.
Now, he said the same thing about Trump, and he said Hillary was a government, someone who was, very much a politician's politician. Now, this one voter, there are others that I happen to follow up with later, more recently, is not voting for Trump in 2020. He actually said, well, I made a mistake. So I think, though, that when you look at the voting behavior of those swing voters,
sure,
that there is something that they're looking at. They're viewing the system differently, perhaps, than you or I, and that doesn't make their views. I don't want to berate their views, the fact that they differ from mine, but they do, and it's actually interesting to hear their perspectives and to try to get to the roots of why they feel that way.
Sure. And, and again, this is a question that I did not prepare, but I was just thinking when you spoke to the different people who said why they voted for Obama and then why they voted for Trump, it really goes back to the perception and the media in my mind. When people say they want something fresh, they want something new, they're tired of the same thing. I mean, I watched a documentary one time and it showed reporters reporting news, and they showed all these different reporters all over the country saying the same thing, like literally almost sounded like verbatim, after another. And, I'm one of those people too that don't really always like the robotic feel. You want something fresh, you want something new, you want something innovative. And a lot of politicians come off that way. I remember growing up in Baptist church, and every year during the election, all these politicians would come to the church. I mean, I didn't even know who they had, never seen them before. And they're at the church, passing out fans and, sitting with you, clapping to them. And it's like, oh, where'd you come from? So it was always this real, over and over and over again type of thing with politicians. So I get the idea that you want something new. And Trump sold it very well. I mean, he sold it very well, that he was coming to drain the swamp, and, he's shaking things up and he's not taking no stuff. I mean, that's really, and he did appeal to a lot of alpha males or beta males that wanted to be alpha males, and they kind of lived through him. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, I'm sure you saw that too when you spoke with people. So this leads me to my next question in regards to freedom of speech. I am a big advocate for freedom of speech. I believe that everybody should be able to speak about how they feel freely. Okay, despite if we agree or disagree, we should be able to, hopefully we can talk in a mature, nice, civil way. That doesn't always happen, but I still believe people should have freedom of speech. But my question has been here recently, is it still free? I have watched a lot of reporters, journalists being kind of crucified, publicly for speaking truths that they feel the truth, or stuff that we saw was the truth, and they're getting crucified. And, I've studied different parts of the world, and journalists and reporters are very oppressed on other parts of the world. They get a certain amount of leverage that they're allowed to, report, and they kind of are given a script on what to say. And one thing I value about America is that we never had that in my opinion. So what do you feel about that? What do you feel about freedom of speech and if it's still free?
Well, freedom of speech and freedom of the press are under siege. I mean, I'm just going to be blunt again
They
in
do.
the administration. That in fact, I mean, the fact that when you crucify peaceful protesters
Yes.
as looters, and when I mean, it's or when peaceful protesters can march to the mayor's house in St. Louis, but they are two people with guns
Yes.
in front of their mansion. I mean, I think that free speech is under siege, and I think again, as we kind of look at fake news and attacks on freedom of the press, that a lot of the assaults on free speech are the tone is being set from the leadership of our country right now, and so I think that is really one of the things that we should all be concerned about.
I agree.
That's one of the things that the protests, I think, have demonstrated is that the attempts to see them even as something different from what they are. There were, I mean, there definitely were some instances of violence, although a lot of it was inspired not by the Black Lives Matter. Much of it was not, in fact, there's evidence that very little, if any of it, was inspired or was taken, that the Black Lives Matter protesters were peaceful by and large. But still, nonetheless, they were met with resistance and actual
aggression
and threat to their ability to actually exercise their right to protest. I think that when you have, that reporters in press conferences can't ask questions without being scolded and spoken to in horrific ways for asking legitimate questions that need to be asked, that we as a public should want our journalists to ask those questions, that's another that's another attack that on free speech, free press, and that we should all really be very concerned about that.
I agree.
Because because that is not compatible with the ideals of our country, even though there are other moments when those ideals have been undermined, and in our history, unfortunately. And but we're at a point where we are far beyond. We should be far beyond the ugliness of that past. And unfortunately, we're not, as we've seen that since 2016. There's been a resurgence of attacks on free speech, free press, and that's very dangerous territory.
I agree.
What bothers me also, I should say, is that there, I think this has to do with our educational system, is the fact that there's studies that show that large numbers of Trump supporters actually have an affinity for a more authoritarian kind of government. Actually, I should say not government, more authoritarian kind of leadership. And that's something that is that borders on being anti-American in terms of what we see as ideal democratic leadership.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think some of that, to your last point, I think some of that goes, people feel that way because we have this idea that, America is this big bad country and we're not taking no stuff. It's this idea that, we've been pushed around, long enough by China or by this place and that place. And you have this person that's saying, we're not taking it anymore. I'm standing up. I'm putting my foot down. And people are really have been emboldened by that. They feel like, Taking Back America. And it's interesting because, and this is a little bit off topic, but I think that it has a lot to do with the direction we're going in, especially when you deal with people who are racist or have those type of ideologies. I remember when I was younger, there was always this talk about, a fear of Black people kind of taking over, this fear of us, doing to white people what, was done to us. There's always been this talk about race war, about civil war, about, all this talk that a lot of white supremacists are fearful of. They are fearful of not being the majority. They are fearful of, and this is something they talk about. So this is just common knowledge. And so when you are being painted a picture of this uprising, of Black people or Hispanics or natives, you have this uprising and people are watching this and, they're taking down monuments and they're doing all this, in people's mind who has been afraid of this for so long. To them, it looks as though this is happening, this takeover. And I think so. My point in saying that is that it's a fear. It's a fear that goes with this. And I think that Trump at times feeds into that fear that people have. And I don't even know if he always knows that he's doing. I don't know. I want to say that he does sometimes, and then sometimes I'm not sure, but it's not even more so about him. It's just more so of the fear of the people he's speaking to. And I think because they are so afraid of that, and see things happening that may not even be happening, that's where a lot of this blind following is coming from, in my opinion. Some of it, of course, that's not everything, but that's a part of it when you deal with the white supremacy side. What do you feel about that?
Well, I feel he gives life, and it's interesting because I think he has given license. First of all, he's emboldened
yes.
people to feel that they can be racist, that they can just let their racism, exist. I think what we should cherish about this country, quite frankly, in this moment, when you look at George Floyd, you look at the horrific faces of those officers in that video, that they stand there. I don't even want to get choked up when I think about this, but they stood there with looks of confidence as they murdered him.
Yeah.
And I think I have to say this, that, I think on some level, Trumpism, or this era of that people have taken clues, whether rightly or wrongly, from the president, from this administration, that they can get away with that. They can actually, that it can be open season. What has been beautiful in my view about our country, and so hopeful, and has been the fact that the multiracial resistance and outrage, and the diversity of people. I've been interviewing people, as you know, in small towns, who have been who were marching and joining protests, not in the places that Minneapolis, Atlanta, or New York, but in other places that, that I think the fact that that the racist may not have anticipated the reaction.
Yes.
They thought that this was an open season, and that they didn't know that there was going to be the level of outrage that we've seen across the country. And when you look at the confidence in the faces of those officers, it's so outrageous and so horrific. Now, still, no one's been convicted, though. At least we do have charges in that case. But of course, there's some that are still where we don't. But I think that that has really, I think, been powerful.
Yes, I agree.
Powerful demonstration that you're not getting away with this. And I think that they thought that they could. That that this was an America that would accept that kind of racism and that kind of murder.
Because we typically are. Because we typically are. Yeah, because we are typically.
Exactly right. Because that hasn't been, and also hasn't been filmed. So often we're in an era now. But even though we've had examples that were horrific like that, that were filmed, and there were not convictions in some of those cases, but in a lot of those cases, actually. But in this one, it was very different in terms of the reaction. And I think there are a variety of reasons why. It's just, I think that I think the way the video was shot, I think has a lot to do with it. But in any event, I do think that that was a big lesson, and and a powerful moment, in this country, that we're not going to allow that. And I think that says something, and we'll see where we go from here.
Yes.
Yet, where we're going and how, but right now, and I don't know if you go, I think every day you see, videos of outrageous behavior and people filming it, and not just the police officers, but there was something I happened to see today in Montclair, New Jersey, where a liberal enclave where an African American family has been over the past 2 years harassed by a neighbor. And the neighbor came out to harass the family again because they wanted to do, they were actually doing some improvements on their home. And she came to ask if they had permits, and started, and onto their property. They told her to get off. And she said, okay, I'm going to call the police and tell them that you attacked me. And
oh my goodness,
neighbors that were around that saw this and said, stop, you can't do this. You are, trying to exploit, at this moment in our country. I mean, you had a whole block of people.
Oh, wow.
That were like, no, you can't do this.
Right.
And, that were very sensitive to this. And you could tell that this family was saying that they've been dealing with this kind of behavior from this woman for a while, and now finally, they have a community of people that were surrounding them to protect them, to say,
oh wow.
And to me, that was very, very. That's another powerful sign of the moment that we're in.
Yes. No, I agree with you. I was, me and my husband went to get away a couple weekends ago. I think it was last weekend. I don't know. Time is so weird right now in this pandemic. I lose track of time, but we wanted to get away, and small little city, and we're driving, and they have a Black Lives Matter little, rally, and it probably was maybe 15 people. I don't know. It wasn't that many. And they were all white. And it was just so refreshing, because I'm like, wow. Because, like you said, you typically see the protests and rallies in big cities, bigger cities. But when you see these smaller places, but I think, to your point, what you talked about at the beginning of that is, just as this time period since 2016 has emboldened white supremacists, I think it also, because people are noticing the blatant hate and blatant narratives that are put out, I think people are just as equally emboldened to be against it. I think people are like, wow, because, we've been talking about this for so long. This is what happens. This is how I feel when I'm the only Black person on my work site, or this is how my child feels when you touch their hair. This is how, we've been talking about these things forever. But I think now that people are seeing it so blatant, I mean, because I know at a couple rallies, where Trump basically said, go ahead and go after them. I'll pay for your hospital bills, and I think that since people are seeing that it's become so much more bold and just blatant, I think people are like, whoa, this is what you've been talking about. And I think a light has come on for some people. So I think that on both sides is equally kind of empowered.
No, I think, and you said it, I love that the way you said it, the metaphor that a light has come on and people are seeing what many of us have been seeing forever.
Our whole lives.
Yeah, but they're seeing it and they're outraged. And and I think that is something that that's a beauty in America, in my view, that many of the racists did not expect to see. And of course, they were a beauty. But that's something that right now is, in fact, quite powerful when you look at this moment.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I've been really moved by some of the outpour and outcry that people have put out. It's been really interesting to watch this shift. In the complete atmosphere. It's just been a lot shifting. So, and it didn't die down like it usually does. We kind of get real bold and get real excited, and then we kind of just go back to business as usual. And it doesn't seem to be doing that right now. So that's pretty exciting. Pretty exciting. Yeah. So I have a question for you. Do you have any of your colleagues that are afraid to report currently? Like, do they have you heard any fear of? Because it's been such a war on the media, which is, blatant. Do you have anybody that's been kind of like apprehensive to report the news accordingly as they see?
I have to say, most of my friends, journalistic colleagues and friends, are, and I'm glad to say this, are very much, driven. Awesome. To really counter and to really, they're outraged by the war on journalists, and rather than that creating fear, it's created an outrage and a drive to really overcome and to really, of course, there are challenges in reporting now with COVID, with other, but I think that. I think we've seen some really good journalism covering and that is courageous. In fact, in the face of a climate in the country that's anti-journalist, where the president will in a rally begin to attack CNN or other reporters.
Yes,
start to attack.
That is so scary,
which is so important to our democracy. I think that what is I'm very proud of journalism in this moment. To be quite honest, because I think that I think there's some things that can be done. I have issues. I've wondered with the abuse that journalists take at his news conferences, and the fact that there is so much spewed that, just that, there comes a time when I think even in the beginning of the coverage of Trump, that there's been a sensationalized element of the coverage that I think, is compatible with the way the media operate in this country too. But I think that by and large, there's been a drive to really report and to, under circumstances that are not conducive to, as conducive as they should be to good journalism.
Sure. No, I can see that. It's funny because, of course, when I asked you to come on, which I'm so happy that you were able to, I did not anticipate speaking about Trump. I've really limited my conversation about Trump just because it goes, it always goes to the left, no matter who I talk to, if it's a supporter or a non-supporter or somebody that doesn't know what's going on. It always ends up going to the left. But to speak about journalism, to speak about the media, you can't help but speak about him because he has put your profession in the limelight. I mean, he's highlighted it because he doesn't go a conference or a news, whatever, a rally without speaking about the media. And, for me, it's just a slippery slope when we start trying to silence people, when we start to silence people and muzzle people and not allow them to speak, but allow some to speak. That's a slippery slope, especially when you know history, especially when you understand what goes on in other countries, especially some of the places that he admires their leadership. When you realize what goes on in these different places, it's a slippery slope. And as you said earlier, this is something that everybody, American, should be cautious of, leery of, or fearful of. And, just kind of paying attention to what's happening because it happens so slowly and subtly, but things can change. And if we don't kind of take a stand, so to speak, as you said, you guys are doing, which I really appreciate, that people are still getting out there and reporting the news, because that was my next question for you. What do you think the future looks like for journalists, and not just journalists, for the media period in America, if we continue at this rate, on this track?
I'm an optimist, I guess you said.
Me too. Good.
I'm an optimist. I think that and I think I used an example or one of the justifications for us being optimists would be just what journalists have done during this administration to stay committed to truth and committed to dignity. So I worry about there are certain elements, but I think that we have to be, I think there's the economic model of journalism, and is right now is at a somewhat tricky place, to say the least.
Sure.
And I think that there's some things that just working through this moment that has so much opportunity in the way, that there's so much opportunity in the 24-hour news cycle in terms of reporting, but there's also, so much, there's so many ways that undermines the promise of good journalism. So, right. I think that while I'm optimistic, I do think that that we're at a point of, I don't want to call it mystery, but at a point of that where we don't know exactly how we're going to preserve good journalism and preserve the role of good journalism in our country. But I also think that we're a country that really, that our democracy must have that. And I think we're going to find a way. That may sound a little pie in the skyish, but I think that it's we can go on and on about some of the things that are wrong, structural things that are wrong with journalism at this moment. But I also think that there are a lot of signs that point to the persistence of journalism and the media as effective elements of our democracy and the continuation of that.
Sure. No, I agree with you. So I want to touch on your book before we leave, because I want you to talk about that, In Search of Black America, Discovering the African American Dream. So I want you to kind of tell me a little bit about your book, because of course I have not had time yet to read it, but I did do a little bit of research and read up about it a little bit. But I want you to tell me a little bit about your book that people can purchase on Amazon if they so see fit. But go ahead, tell me a little bit about your book.
And you can get the book, and you can get the what do you call it? You can get the audio version. But
Oh, awesome. Awesome. No, thank you for that.
But thank you for that. But no. So I, one of the things that I've always been, as an African American, I've always appreciated the diversity of the African American experience, and
Sure.
always, appreciated just how, also one of the most important elements of the Black experience in this country is the persistence, and the ability to make a way despite, so many hurdles that have come with racism, and the different ways in which people have jumped over those hurdles.
Sure.
And that to me is, and the different perspectives that come with doing that. So I felt that I wanted to just go on the road and kind of document and talk to different people about about their lives and about the corners that they've created to actually build a life in this country despite a lot of hurdles that were unnecessary and that were tied to racism.
Sure.
Really look at many of the things. I mean, just a lot of the structural things that have happened. That the inability to get home loans. I mean, there's just been so many things that have distorted the American dream for African Americans, but yet, people have still found a way to achieve the dream, and and have really found a way to create spaces that protect the dream, that protect their children. And so, and they've done that in different ways. That in one way, you have to be careful. I was always careful about this project because I didn't necessarily want to suggest that, for someone to say, okay, look, you overcame these hurdles, so there must not be any problems, and that's definitely not the case. Right. And what I found was just stories that surprised me of people, people in the West who are African American cowboys and cowgirls. People in New England, people in Lawnside, New Jersey, a town that goes back to the Underground Railroad. That, is still in existence today.
Wow.
To southeastern Ohio, to a small community that's actually in a Trump County, where many African Americans, who it was on the path of the Underground Railroad. And so after, it's an interesting but it's an interesting Juneteenth kind of story that they celebrate the emancipation in September because that's when they learned about it. And many of the people left that county, but they still come back now every year in September to celebrate the emancipation.
Wow.
In a county that's overwhelmingly white now, and
wow.
So it's kind of like a journey into various people on various socioeconomic levels, even from people, families on the Gold Coast of Washington, D.C., to families to African American bowlers who have the TNBA, the National Bowling Association, and African American Association of Bowlers, that serves as a way to form community. So it was kind of a journey into all of these places, some of which were very new to me, so that's what the book, it tells the story. And, it's interesting because it was before the Obama era. Much journey took place between 95 and 2000. And I kind of think it is in reading Dreams from My Father and Michelle Obama's book, I see a lot of their backgrounds, in particular Michelle Obama, but even to some extent in Obama's perspective, I see a lot of the roots of their sense of community in the communities that I visited and the people that I talked to. And, and there were ideological differences among, the people that I spoke with. And there was some who would disagree with me on certain issues. And that made it even more interesting and a fulfilling a journey.
Yeah. Wow. I'm going to order the book because I'm really curious to read it, especially hearing a little bit more about what you had to say about it, and it's just, I think that's the beauty of it, is that we all, despite how we look, if we look alike, we don't look alike, when you look at, class, and when you look at experience, background, culture, religion. I mean, we just have so many backstories, and we have to just learn to respect that in each other and try to learn from each other, because those stories, those backstories cultivate us and mold us into who we are. And that's what we give out into the world. And I really admire journalists. I admire people who search out truths, in different people, because we all could look at the same thing and get a different perspective, on it. And I think that it's important and mature of us to at least try to understand. We don't have to agree. I mean, that's a given that we won't, right? But to be able to just have that conversation and just say, because it's just so interesting when you hear about people. I was speaking to someone, which is a whole different topic, but about, adoption and abortion. And because I'm really curious about, different people's perspectives in regards to that. Some people, when you find out that they were once, pro-life and now they're pro-choice because they almost died, or a friend of them, a friend of theirs almost, had a really scary situation, and it changed their perspective based on their own personal experience. And that's what we have to just realize, that people have their own personal experiences. And back to journalism, I really appreciate you. I appreciate you capturing those different experiences. I read through a lot of your articles that you've done. I mean, really great work, especially, the fight that you do for, the Black community is awesome. And I looked up your wife too. The stuff that she does is amazing. So I really appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time for being here today. It was amazing. And I always wish it could go longer, because the conversation is just magnified.
Well, I'm so glad that you invited me. I really appreciate it. I'm going to tell my wife too that you're a fan. She'll like that. And but I just think this conversation has been so enriching, and so I really appreciate you. I'm so glad you invited me.
Well, I'm glad you said yes. It's so funny, because I just kind of just ask and hope for the best. And, most people are pretty open to have conversations. So I appreciate it. So thank you again. Yes, tell your wife. And if she would like to ever come on and talk about her work, I know she's doing something different now, but she used to be the deputy commissioner.
Right. Deputy Commissioner of Human Rights for the state of New York.
I would love to talk to her. So if she ever wants to come on, she can sit in that same seat.
Definitely, I'll let her know.
Yes, please do. I love just understanding people's journeys. So again, thank you so much, and I wish you a great evening. And I just appreciate this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no problem. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
So I just want to again thank David for coming on and sharing his perspective. And again, thank him for his voice out there in the field. It's just so appreciated. So again, I thank you guys for coming on today too. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation, because I did. And if you want to know a little bit more about his book, go ahead and purchase it. Support Black business and also support this conversation because I think it's really interesting because I'll be getting my book. So anyway, you guys have a great evening and thanks again for coming and sitting down with us and having a conversation. All right, thanks. Bye.